All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I'll be your host for today. Always exciting to kickstart one of these events and see all the viewers starting to tune in live via YouTube, see the faces who are joining us right in the Zoom call. It's great to be able to keep the learning going during these challenging times and broadcast these events live into the homes of students, of parents, and of educators all across North America. And beyond. As I take a quick peek at YouTube, I can see we've got groups joining us in Canada, in San Jose, Rhode Island, Michigan, Los Angeles. So great to see lots of groups joining us. Don't forget to let us know where you're watching from. Send us in some questions and we'll work those in a little bit later. But now let's get to the main event. So today we're pretty darn lucky to be hanging out with James Herrera. He's the program coordinator at the Duke Lemur Center SAVA Conservation Program. Their mission is the preservation of natural lemur habitats, especially rainforests, and they do so through community-based conservation programs. So James has a background in lemur ecology and is now managing these conservation activities, making him feel like he can act on what he's learned during his research and get used to a few more of these events coming your way from Duke Lemur Center. This is the first of many events to come with all sorts of amazing scientists from the center. We're going to learn a lot about lemurs over the next few weeks. I'm pretty excited. So James, it's so great to have you joining us live today. We're excited to get to know you a little bit better and your program. And then of course, we're going to fire away with a little Q&A action.
That's great. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to talk with so many people around the US and North America about what Duke Lemur Center is doing in Madagascar and just about Madagascar in general, because it's such a fascinating place, but so few people get to go there. So really excited to share a little bit of it with you.
All right, that sounds great. I often hear Madagascar referred to as almost its own planet or this island of biodiversity. So when you're ready, we're excited to jump in.
Cool, I'll go ahead and share my screen. It's true, folks often refer to it as the 8th continent, but it really is like stepping into a whole world of its own. So just let me know if you can see the slides all right.
Yeah, looks good.
So I wanted to take today as an opportunity to give a little bit more introduction and background to Madagascar. And so in the spirit of exploring by the seat of your pants, in this talk, I'll be exploring the social and ecological links between people and nature in Madagascar. And just to let you know, I'm going to do kind of like 3 sections, hopefully about 5 minutes each, and then I'll pause for each section so that you can ask questions, because we are going to take some different directions, and so I don't want you to have to hold on to those questions until the very end. And let me know if I'm going too fast or if you're bored to tears. So I'll just start out with a little general about Madagascar. As we just mentioned, it's an island, but it really is like the 8th continent. It's just off the southeast coast of Africa, and it may look small next to Africa, but it's actually the 4th largest island in the world. It's about the size of the state of Texas, and it's very long. It's like 1,000 miles long. And because it's situated in the tropics, because it's an island in the Indian Ocean, there's a lot of different geographic variables or factors that play into what makes Madagascar so special. So in this map, you can already kind of see there's like a green side on the right or on the eastern side. And the western side is very gray. And that gray or beige, that's indicating that there's not that much tree cover there, whereas on the east, the green is a lot of tree cover or rainforest. And the reason that it's concentrated in the east is because of something called orographic effects. So that's when the warm, moist air and wind coming off the ocean hit these mountains. And as they climb up the mountains, that water vapor condenses and it rains and it dumps tons and tons of water on the land, which makes it great for plants to grow. But once you go to the other side of that mountain, it's called a rain shadow. All the moisture has come out of the air in the form of rain, and now on the other side it's very dry. So that's one of the factors that creates this mosaic in Madagascar. So as I mentioned, on the east, there's the mountains with the rainforest, and this is really lush tropical forest full of plants and animals. Once you get to the tops of those mountain peaks, it's really like sometimes like you stepped onto the moon, but then you see these little swampy, marshy areas that are kind of like the moors of England. And then as you get farther west in the plateau, it's this big open, very dry grassland, and you'll just see a few communities or settlements scattered around in this grassland. But every now and then you find these little pockets of what we call wooded grassland. And that's where you still have enough moisture that there can be trees. And there's places that are like the Grand Canyon in the US. And you're in this kind of bad land where you can't figure out where there's any water to support this life. And then boom, there's an oasis that, is just such a relief to jump in and go for a swim. Keep going further west and there's no more swimming pools. It's just this dry, deciduous forest, the famous baobabs that you may have seen in the imagery. This is one in the center, but it doesn't look all that spectacular now because it's in the peak of the dry season. All the trees lose their leaves. It really only rains about 1 or 2 months out of the year. And go further south and it's really almost a desert. They only get rainfall a few weeks, if that, out of the year. And all these plants that may look like cactuses, they're actually not cactuses at all. They're unique families of plants only found in Madagascar, and they're covered in spines just like cactus, but it's a unique convergence on the same kind of morphology or anatomy. So of course the lemurs are very famous. They're the only primates in Madagascar. Primates include monkeys, apes, and people, but only in Madagascar can you find lemurs. That's what we call endemic. It means they're only found in that one place. And there's about 100 different species that are alive today. They range from the smallest species that are on this left side. Let me know if you can see my cursor. This left side of the graph, where you can see this is the mouse lemur and the dwarf lemur. These are nocturnal, which means they're active at night. And that's why they have these big eyes, because they've got to take in as much light as they can. They're very small. The mouse lemur, it gets its name because it's about the size of a mouse. It fits in the palm of your hand. And they eat insects and very small fruits. But as you move to the right on this picture, it gets bigger body size. This is the famous eye here, which is very rare. It's only active at night, and it's very difficult to see them. In many years of searching at night in Madagascar, I've only seen them twice. This is the famous ringtail lemur here at the bottom, but then there's also species that are kind of like mini pandas. They're adapted to eating bamboo, which is a very tough food to eat. And down at the bottom right, this is the indri. This is the largest living lemur. It's about the size of a German shepherd and about 22 or 25 pounds. And it's a really special animal. And I wish I could just spend hours telling you all about these animals, but as Joe mentioned, you're going to be getting a lot more media on lemurs in the weeks to come. And so I'm going to leave most of the fun part of talking to lemurs to my colleagues at the Duke Lemur Center, who will fill you in more. But at this point, I'm just going to take a brief pause, and I want to see if anybody has any questions so far.
All right. So to those tuning in via YouTube, if you have any questions about what James has talked about so far, send in some of those questions. As well, those who are in the call with us, raise your hand digitally. You can raise your blue hand and I will know to pick you, or send something in the chat. I'm watching both. And we've got Cordelia and Huxley joining us in Waterloo, Ontario, and looks like they have a question.
My question is, what's your favorite type of lemur?
Great question, thank you. I love to be able to talk about this. My favorite, let me go back to that slide with these cutie lemurs. This is my favorite. This is the dwarf lemur. They're called dwarf lemurs because they are so small. And I forget what it is in ounces, but he's about 300 or 500 grams. That's like maybe not even 1 pound, less than 1 pound, I think. I have to do the math. But they're really cool. They're small, they're nocturnal. They run around at night, which is like a very difficult thing for most primates to do because primates, like people, are very visually oriented animals. But the dwarf lemurs, they have these big eyes. They've got a great sense of smell. And they're really important in the environment too. They're known to be pollinators. So they'll stick that little snout deep inside a flower to eat the nectar. And then they get their faces covered in pollen. And then when they go to the next flower, they mix that pollen. That helps the plants to grow. They're also seed dispersers, which means that when they eat fruit, it goes through their stomach and they poop it out. And they're like the farmers of the forest. Those seeds actually germinate, they grow better than when they're not eaten by lemurs. And so they help to grow the forest. There's lots and lots of other factors that are cool about them. If you go to the very high mountains, you find a different species that's really only found at the high mountain peak. And then when you go to lower areas, you get a totally different species. So for all these reasons and more, they're my favorite.
All right, good answer. Tuning in via YouTube, we have Carla, and Carla's curious about predators. What are some predators of lemurs?
Yeah, there's a unique group of carnivores on Madagascar that are actually more closely related to hyenas than they are to like dogs or cats, even though the most famous one, the fossa, kind of looks like a dog-cat hybrid. But they're totally unique. They probably got to Madagascar somehow, just like lemurs, by rafting from Africa. And they're quite diverse. I forget exactly how many species, but you've got a small one that kind of looks like a ring-tailed ferret, and they are omnivorous. They run around eating just about anything. But then you also have the biggest one, the fossa, and that is the big predator for the large lemurs. So these guys that you see down here at the bottom, the shifaka, the varicea, the rough lemur, these are actually the big prey items for the fossa. So the lemurs are also very important as food for the predators. You can't have these big predators without having lemurs.
All right, we're going to grab one more before we let James continue. Brianna, I can see that your hand is up. Do you want to unmute for me, Brianna?
Hi, what is the lifespan of most lemurs?
Thank you. Yeah, this is it's hard to give you a perfect answer because first, studying them in the wild, they live very long, so it can actually be really hard to spend enough time doing the research to see how long they live. But also because lifespan and other features of what we call life history, things like when you reproduce, when you age, and things like that, it's very closely related to body size. So as you might guess, the smaller species live shorter than the bigger species. But to give you an idea, in the wild, some mouse lemur species may only live 1 to 3 years. Others have been found to live 4, maybe even 10 years in the wild. But then in captivity, they can actually live to, and I'll have to check with my colleagues at the Duke Lemur Center, but they can live to be over 10 years old in captivity. These little guys the size of a mouse. When it comes to the shifakas, actually my PhD advisor is one person who's done a lot of research on the lifespan of the shifakas, and in the wild, they can live into their 20s and still reproduce, no less. And they've actually even shown that when they get older, their teeth wear down so much that's one of the factors that actually causes them to decline over time, is that their teeth just wear out and they can't chew as well.
All right. So James, let's carry on and then we'll do another little Q&A portion when you're ready.
Great, sounds good. Well, now I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Malagasy people. They are a fascinating group. Just to give you a little bit of a sense, where the timeline of Madagascar and human history has changed significantly in the last few years. For a very long time, we thought that the Malagasy people first got there about 2,000 years ago. Then there was some really cool archaeological evidence that came out that suggested 4,000 years ago. And just recently, they've found some bones of animals that have cut marks on them that indicate maybe people were on Madagascar as long as 10,000 years ago. Now, as late as that seems, it's actually very recent in human history. If you think about it, one of my colleagues at the Duke Lemur Center, Matt Borst, likes to point out that people were already building castles and well, at the time when people got to Madagascar. So it's very, very interesting that we have this kind of really recent history that then diversified. And so I'm just giving a couple of photos of friends and colleagues in Madagascar and folks that we've worked with in the villages. And so this is a map of the distribution of different ethnic groups in Madagascar. There's actually 18 different ethnic groups, and they are kind of distributed across the island. You can see that they form little pockets where you have distinct groups. And each of these groups has a really intimate and unique system in which they use the natural environment around them. So you can imagine the people who live in the rainforest, they've got a very different culture and system of living than the people living in the dry forest. And so just like with the plants and animals that we see this diversity, we see diversity in people too. And the people really depend on these natural resources because for the longest time, they have largely been subsistence agriculturalists. And to this day in the countryside, subsistence agriculture means growing enough food to feed your home and your family, not really enough to sell a lot. Now, of course, there are many big cities. It's getting quite developed. There's 25 or more million people in Madagascar. And the cities are becoming quite modern. There's internet cafes and things like that. But when you go out to the countryside, people still depend very heavily on what we call ecosystem services. Now, all people depend on ecosystem services because these are the services that nature provides for people for free. Things like the oxygen we breathe, the water that we get comes from a natural water cycle. And especially important for the farmers and people in Madagascar are things like creating the soil fertility, the forest and all those leaf litter and roots and things like that. That's what really creates the soil. And the soil is a living ecosystem with different kinds of fungi, bacteria, and even animals that make the soil strong and good for plants to grow. The forest is also very important because those roots of the trees and plants hold the soil together and prevent erosion. And that's super important because without that, that root system, the soil can just wash away. So the people really in Madagascar really know this and depend on this day to day. And I want to give an example of this tree, the ravanala, or the traveler tree in English. It's standing right here. It's got these big, huge leaves that look like palm fronds, but it's actually not a palm. And people really depend on this tree. It's actually the national tree of Madagascar because of its many uses. The leaves, when they cut these and dry these, they use these as thatch for the houses, the roof of the houses, just like in this picture. But they also use the trunks of the tree for building. And they, if we go back to that slide, there in the middle, where you can see the leaves coming together, inside of that is like a big heart of palm, and the people can eat it. So that's just a few of the uses that folks have for the ravanala tree. Bamboo is also another important resource, especially in the East. Bamboo is really great because it's pretty strong and durable, but it's also very fast growing. So it can be used in a sustainable way. And people use it for a variety of things. Here, one of a person from the village has collected some bamboo. Excuse me, they cut it in half and hammer it to flatten it out. And then they can use it to weave the walls of their homes or the roof. This house is a little bit fallen out of disuse, but I thought it's such a good example of how intricately they use these bamboo products to make their homes. And of course, they don't go to Lowe's or Home Depot when they need to buy wood for building their house. They go to the forest, and so they collect these timbers that they have this really great knowledge. They're like the best botanists of which trees have the right wood for different uses, how quickly the wood will rot, things like that. There's also a lot of other products besides just construction, like food. People in Madagascar get a lot of food from the forest, fruit trees, things like that. But also honey is a very important product. And here one of the farmers has just collected honey straight out of a wild beehive. Really amazing skills. There's also edible insects. This is one of my favorites that a colleague of mine, Courtney Borderson, has turned me on to. It's called a sakunji, or a lantern bug, if I'm not mistaken with the common name. And it's edible. Believe it or not, once you boil these, they taste like bacon and eggs. And it's got lots of protein and iron, which is very good and healthy for people in Madagascar. I'm going to talk mostly about agrarian or rural or farming communities. These are all the words we use for referring to farming. And here we can see a Malagasy woman farmer in her rice field. Rice is a very important crop for the people there. They eat more rice in Madagascar than anywhere else in the world. And it's a very important part of their culture. I forgot to mention that the origins of Malagasy people probably is a mix of coming from Borneo in Southeast Asia and Africa. And so we know this based on the language. We can tell it's a mix of Indonesian, Polynesian, and sorry, not Polynesian, Indo-Austrian, something like that, and Bantu from East Africa. But so the people who came from Southeast Asia brought with them this rice culture. And so here we see rice, but also beans and corn. Here's a hillside where they're growing corn and cassava. These are really important crops that they eat almost every day. People who own the low valleys, they can have these really big, expansive rice fields, which are very productive. They can make a lot of rice. And if you see a stunning landscape like this, I mean, just imagine the amount of rice that farmers can cultivate in the foothills of these big, beautiful mountains. But, you know, valleys are only one kind of landscape. And actually, this is a very rough, very mountainous area. And so valleys are hard to come by. Most farmers don't own the valleys. And so when they have to farm, they go to the hillsides and they use what's called slash and burn. So this is where the farmer will cut a little piece of the forest and let all that vegetation that you see dry. And when it's nice and dry, they will burn it. And by burning it, this produces a ton of ash. And the ash has lots of nutrients in it that provide like a quick fertilizer to grow their crops, their rice. Now, this is usually only done once, and then the land has to rest or be fallow for a few years to let the vegetation grow back to repeat. But unfortunately, because the land is kind of all being used up, the farmers are returning to that same land repeatedly, and it really quickly starts to lose its fertility. So here we can see this kind of mosaic landscape where in the valleys you've got these rice fields, but then the hillsides you can see some areas like here that have just recently been cut and burned, other areas that are kind of regrowing, little patches. And then up here where you still see forest, this is actually a national park. So the farmers are not allowed to go any further. But where there are no national parks, we often see that the hillsides become totally cut. And this can be really difficult, not only for natural habitats, but for the farmers, because the soil has lost its fertility. They can't get a good harvest from that land anymore. And if you see down here, this is what we call like an erosion gully. Like I said, without the trees to hold that soil together, the land just kind of collapses. So this is a very common problem that we see across the world, especially in the tropics. And now we're just going to look at Madagascar. This is like a Google Earth image where the green, again, is the vegetation. And here, the pink is habitat loss based on satellite imagery. So we know that even since 1950, about 40% of the forest has been cut in Madagascar. And the sheer amount is really hard for me to wrap my mind around. If you can imagine this, it's equal to about 1.2 million soccer fields or football fields just in the last 60 years. And I'm going to zoom in to the northeastern part of Madagascar, which is called the SAVA region. And this is where the DLC is doing our outreach and conservation. So in the SAVA region here, the green is showing forest cover, and up in the top you can see this is an aerial photo, a photo taken from planes in the 1950s. And then starting in the 1970s, we have satellites that can take pictures of this land cover and give us the updates. And then in 2017, we can really see how the forest has shrunk. Just in the last 18 years, 20% of the forest in the SAVA region has disappeared. So this is not only about preserving natural places for lemurs and other wild species, but it's also about those ecosystem services that the people rely on. And so I'm going to take another pause here and see if anybody has any questions about this section.
All right, awesome. So again, let's get a few questions coming in via YouTube. I see a few hands up already in the Zoom call. I do want to announce as well that I did, while James was talking, I opened a Slido room and I put together a little quiz to see how well people were paying attention. So we've got a little interactive quiz. I've shared the link in YouTube. So you just have to click the link. It'll take you to the quiz sign up. Just pop your name in. And then after James finishes the next portion of the talk, we will jump into the quiz and we'll see who comes out on top. It's timed. And obviously the right answer is important too. And we'll see who our top three students are in the event. All right. So Brooklyn, do you want to unmute for me and you can go ahead and ask a question?
Forget or protect.
Hi, so do you know the tree that he showed us? Is that like the tallest tree in Madagascar? Because it looks like a really tall tree.
This one's actually, it's all about the perspective. So in this picture, I'm going to zoom all the way back. In this picture, I'm up on a hill and the tree is growing on the slope below. So it is probably about, I'd say maybe 30 feet tall or more. But no, they're not the tallest trees. These are actually, they don't get that tall because they're a fast growing tree that grows especially well in this open area, but they don't live very long. So they'll usually die long before they get to a height like these other forest trees. But deep inside the pristine rainforest, the trees are amazing. It's like being inside of a giant cathedral because you've got these massive trees that are almost 100 feet tall. And not only that, but they're enormous. Like it takes multiple people to wrap your arms around this tree. And the understory or the floor of the forest actually gets very open and very thin because those big trees cause it to be so dark that very little vegetation can grow below it.
All right, let's grab a question from Ava in Wisconsin. Your mic is on.
Who was the first one in Madagascar?
Like the first people? Yeah, we're really not too sure, to be honest. But as I mentioned, and I actually think I fumbled with the wording, but we think that people came from Borneo. At least some ancestry came from Borneo, like maybe 2,000 or 4,000 years ago. And Borneo is an island in Asia, so probably the people sailed to Madagascar. But we also know that there were some people who came from Africa. And it's very difficult because we don't have much archaeological evidence, and also because there was not a written history in Madagascar until very recently. So we're not too sure. That's still an open question that scientists are trying to figure out.
All right, let's shift over to YouTube because I know we have a few questions there. Let's see. Valentina is tuning in and she's wondering if there's efforts being made to replant the forest.
Thank you for that question. And actually, I'm going to hang on to it because that's the last section of the presentation.
All right, perfect. A little teaser of what's coming up. Let's see. Oh, here we go. Jamie wants to know about the population in Madagascar. What's roughly the population size?
About 25 million people and growing. So it's, just like in a lot of the rest of the world, the population growth rate's pretty high. And so it's about 25 million now. It's predicted that it might even double within the next 30 or 40 years or less, perhaps.
All right. Well, one more reminder to jump into the Slido room with the link and get ready for the quiz. And we'll take it right after James finishes his next session. Then we'll wrap up with a few more questions. All right, James, take it away.
Great. So I really appreciate that question about the efforts that are being made for reforestation. And that's a little bit about it's a very big push, in the last 50 or 60 years, but especially this year. The president of Madagascar has made a big commitment to reforest. He plans to, and as a country, they plan to plant 60 million trees in honor of their 60th anniversary of independence. And they're doing a great job already. So I can talk about that more towards the end. But the Duke Lemur Center, as you may know, is an organization that's based out of Duke University in North Carolina. But we have a program in Madagascar called the SAVA Conservation Program. And so this is what we call a community-based approach to conservation. So that means that we work very closely with these communities, the local stakeholders, which is to say the people who really have the biggest stake in the projects. And so for us, this especially means the people who live out on the forest frontier, those farmers that I told you about. So we meet with them in their villages, in their farms, and we do a lot of meetings and listening and interviewing. So here I'm speaking with some of the village elders about their visions for agriculture, the challenges they face. They're telling us about how they get decreasing yields. They want to be able to diversify and grow more different crops, some for food and some for selling. So we try to really listen. We do these group meetings so we can hear a lot of different voices. We do one-on-one interviews too, so that we can collect real data, sociological data about things like food security, agricultural productivity, health, and how they use the land. We work very closely with several different partners, but one that I really want to highlight is the university in the SAVA region. It's called CURSA, And it's a really vibrant, enthusiastic group that I'm really enjoying working with. I also want to point out my partner, Laura Diarra, here in the middle, who's the Duke Lemur Center liaison in Madagascar, and she works with us on all these projects. This is the director of the university, Christophe Manzari Bey, one of the teachers, Fulgence, and here is Evra and Torienne, two recent graduates who have become entrepreneurs in conservation. And so by working with these and collaborating, we're partnering with them. You know, we can really work through their system to know that we're doing things that are sensitive to the local culture. So one of these is agroforestry. As one of the students asked, what are we doing to replant these trees on the landscape? Well, one means is called agroforestry. This is a mix of agriculture and forestry, planting trees within the agricultural landscape. So we do this through partnerships. So again, here's members of CURSA, the university. 100 students and teachers volunteered to help the local Ministry of the Environment, these folks here on the side, that have created tree nurseries. In this particular tree nursery, over 60,000 seedlings were produced when we took this picture. I think they're already over 100,000 by now. And they're growing these trees to reforest the degraded hillsides and landscape. And the students helped to bring in the soil to fill 3,000 pots, you know, with 60,000 little seedlings. That's a lot of work to water them, to take care of them. And so the university, the local government, and Duke are working together in these kinds of projects. So the Ministry of the Environment is one organization that's working on this, but there are a lot of kind of grassroots efforts that are supported by different non-government organizations or NGOs. And here is a nursery that's run by one of the communities. This is Florien. He's not only the tree nursery technician, he's also a teacher at the local school. So he really has a lot of ability to engage students in these kinds of activities, and he's really great with the students. Together, his goal, he told me in October, was to have 10,000 seedlings in his nursery, and by December he had 12,000. So he already surpassed his goal. And these he gives to the local community, the farmers, so they can plant where they like. And the community as a group came together to say, we want to do a beach restoration, because this is a coastal community. They just live right on the beach. And so we are helping to contribute more seedlings to this effort. So here we gave about 1,500 seedlings as part of a consortium with a German organization, the Diversity, Turn, and Land Use Sciences. And we gave these seedlings, as well as those seedlings that they were already growing in their nursery, to the community, and they planted them out on this beach. And this is going to help to prevent the beach erosion. They're seeing that kind of sand just washing away every year. But it's also important to help with what we call a windbreak. So when they get storms like hurricanes, those winds just come ripping off the ocean and really do a lot of damage. But where you've got big trees to block that wind, it can help to prevent some of that storm surge. We also try to create economic opportunities with these trees. So we're doing cash crop farming as well. Here is Auguste and Marcelin, who are running a tree nursery at one of the local schools. And here in the bottom right, these are native trees that are forest trees from Madagascar, but they're also growing what we call cash crops. These are things like coffee, which is here in the middle. Coffee actually comes from a tree, in case you never knew. Cacao, which is where chocolate comes from, that's another tree. And all these very yellow leaves that you can see on the sides, that's chocolate. There's also cloves, it's another kind of spice. And all these different trees can provide a source of income. So it's about restoring the landscape as well as getting an economic benefit. We're also working in what's called regenerative agriculture. This is like an organic farming that goes a step further. We're really trying to bring that soil back to life. The farmers tell us when they describe their soil, they say the soil is dead. And really, when you look at it, and especially in these beach communities, it's very sandy soil. In other places, it can be rock hard because of the erosion. So you really need to bring that soil back to life or regenerate it. And here we are with a local farming community, as well as students from the university, at a workshop that we conducted in Madagascar. And so here we collaborated with the farmers and the students to show them how they can use locally available materials. Here, Lily is showing you handfuls of compost, ashes from the cooking fire, because people there still cook with mostly firewood. And they're mixing that into the soil to help bring it back to life. And you can see we did this right in the middle of a community where the school children have an opportunity to see and other community members can see. And this is actually, it's nothing new to them. They're used to making compost and they're used to these kinds of natural methods. But in recent years, things like chemical fertilizers and pesticides have been introduced and become more common. And folks, you know, they know that their yields are declining and they want to do something. So they are often told that these fertilizers can be really good. But especially some of these chemicals can be harmful to human health. There's actually a lot of pesticides that have been banned in America or in Europe, but they're still widely available in Madagascar. They were banned because they're bad for human health. When we talk with local farmers, actually one of the farmers told us that this kind of farming that we were doing is vulanjazana, the way of farming of our ancestors, because we don't use any of those chemicals. It's also a really great way to empower women. Women are fundamental to agricultural value chains. They're really important farmers, but often they are underrepresented in a training like this. They're less likely to get loans from the bank to be able to do this kind of experimental farming. And for the students, you know, they're often, there's kind of a male-dominated society where women have a very specific role. And we're really trying to help those women to break out of that role a little bit, learn more about agricultural business as well. So this is all many factors that are involved. And we're seeing fantastic results. Just within 2 weeks, these model gardens were already popping with life. We planted diverse kinds of beans. Here you can also see tomato and lemongrass all growing together. We focus on what's called polyculture. So this is different from monoculture, where you have just one kind of crop. Polyculture, you have many. And this can really help the farmers, because if one crop fails, if there's bugs that eat it, or if the season's just not right, they may have another crop that they can fall back on. But if they only have one type of crop and that goes wrong, then they have nothing. So we're trying to really promote polyculture. And so today I want to highlight one of the farmers, Jeannot, who was really engaged and adamantly enthusiastic about the training that we did. And he immediately went out to his field and made his own garden. And so this is his field back in November, or actually beginning of December, where he's used, you can see this dead grass on top. That's like a mulch to help keep the soil moist. And he's planted it with corns, beans, and a variety of plants. And here's his farm in February. It's already bursting with life with these corn, squash, peanuts, cassava, and even rice grown without slash and burn and without flooding the fields. And so here, just yesterday, I got an update from Jeannot's field, and his rice is almost ready to harvest. And it may not seem like much for us where we're used to seeing our rice in a bag at the store, but for these folks, you know, this, I even referred to it as bulamena, it's gold. It's really important to the local folks. So I just kind of want to wrap up briefly by talking about what we can do. You know, often when we're hearing things like this about stuff going on in other parts of the world, we really want to do something to help, but we just don't know how. And so I want to start by pointing out that, most of the viewers of this presentation who are living in the high income countries or the North and West, we have a disproportionate impact on the globe and the global ecology compared to places like Madagascar. So in this map, I'm showing what's called the ecological footprint, or really how much natural resources the countries are using. And the darker the shade of purple, the more resources we are using. So you can see how this is really disproportionately distributed across the globe. So we as members of the high income countries can do a lot for places like Madagascar with the choices we make every day. Things like just turning off your lights when you're not in the room, not letting the water run, Those basic things about, being thrifty with our resources are huge. I like to take opportunities like this to talk about plastics and single-use plastics, which, we may use them here in the US and then they get in the ocean and next thing you know, they're turning up in, islands in the Pacific. So, avoiding using plastic shopping bags and utensils, things like that can have a really big impact. We also need to recognize that a lot of our products come from places like Madagascar. So electronics have lots of different kinds of metals that come originally from places like the Congo or Madagascar. So think about these things when we're buying our electronic products. Palm oil is another one that is usually not grown in a sustainable way. So you really want to watch out for palm oil in your products. So these are the kinds of things that we can do from home. But I also like to point out that the Duke Lemur Center SAVA Conservation Program is 100% funded by donations and grants. And so if you are interested, you can go to the website, thelemur.duke.edu, and check it out and share it with other folks and spread the word about what we're doing. And that's a really big help. And so, we've gotten funding, and I want to thank our sponsors from a lot of different organizations. We couldn't have done it without these groups. And we're continuing to apply for more grants. And I want to take this time also to thank our partners in Madagascar. Like I mentioned, Laura Diarra, she's our Duke liaison, and she's got a background in environmental education. That's a whole nother topic that maybe for another event we could talk about, how we're working with the school kids and teachers to promote environmental education. This is Lantu Anjiananjasana. He's a Malagasy program coordinator who's based in our program in Sambava in Madagascar. This is Charlie Welsh, the conservation coordinator at Duke. Vita Modeste and Bruno are some of our environmental education trainers. They help to teach teachers about incorporating environmental education into the curriculum. And then of course, Rabbe Manansua Torien, who's working with us in our farming projects, and Benasuavina Evra, who's jack of all trades, environmental education, farming, research. And then I'll just close by letting you know our motto, which is Miara Watiala Mumbuli Fiainana. If you protect the forest, life will grow. And I'll take any more questions you guys have.
All right, James, let's get you to come back from that screen share. If you hit the stop at the top, we'll get you nice front and center again. Perfect. All right, thanks for that great presentation. Madagascar is such an amazing place. I mean, the biodiversity, the life, insects that taste like bacon and eggs. Pretty cool. And yeah, I mean, it's always tough to hear stories of the loss of so much habitat and species, but it's also good to hear there's a lot of groups working hard to kind of turn that around and make sure that the people and the environment can coexist and both can get what they need.
Yeah, very well said.
All right, so I'm going to give a couple seconds for people to jump back into the quiz room. We have a good group there waiting to start. Little quick update. It takes each question, you have 20 seconds. The quicker you answer, the more points you get. And of course, it has to be right. That's a big key thing too. So I picked a few multiple choice questions from James' talk. Let's see how people are doing. So I'm starting the quiz. The first question is up. Madagascar is sometimes called Lemur Town, the 8th continent, or Cloud Island. Let's see who was paying attention. All right, first question is done. It looks like I tricked most with Lemur Town, although sure, there's lots of lemurs. I'm not sure that too many refer to Madagascar as Lemur Town, but the correct answer is the 8th continent, and 39% went with that. All right, let's move on to the next question. This time, we are curious about the Duke Lemur Center. Is it located in Canada, Michigan, Los Angeles, or North Carolina? So who remembers when James mentioned that? It wasn't too long ago. All right, a few more seconds. All right, we did a little better with that one. 72% rolled with North Carolina. All right, let's jump on to that next question. So this time we're curious about endemic. James used the word endemic. Does that mean found in one place in the world? Is that only comes out at night? Is it common in many countries, or did it mean very cute? All those endemic lemurs. A couple more seconds. All right, good job, everybody. 63% rolled with found in one place. 5% thought very cute. And although that is true about lemurs, it's not what we were looking for. Next question rolling right now. What was James's favorite lemur? Was it the sportive lemur, the ring-tailed lemur, the dwarf lemur, or the mouse lemur? So we talked about that right at the beginning, the first Q&A action. All right, good job. 65% went with the dwarf lemur. Rolling on to the question coming up next. Evidence shows that people were first on Madagascar 100 years ago, 10,000 years ago, or 100,000 years ago. Got a few more seconds to finish that one. All right, good job, everybody. Over 80% went with 10,000 years ago. I believe we have one more question to wrap things up. And this one is about the forest loss in Madagascar. Is it 1.2 million football fields, 3,000 football fields? Is it 80% or it's all gone? A few more seconds to wrap us up. All right, we've got over half went with 1.2 million football fields. Let's tally those results, see our leaderboard. Elena Welch, 6 out of 6 in 1 minute and 6 seconds. George C, 6 out of 6 in 1 minute 14. And then Leah B, 5 out of 6 in 50 seconds. Good job, everyone. Thanks for paying attention and playing with us today. Let's grab a few more questions. So Ms. Rigo, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead with the question.
Hi, everyone. So my question is, I know that you said that Madagascar is the size of Texas, and I know you showed us a lot of agricultural photos. I'm just wondering, are there any more urban centers, or is Madagascar primarily a rural agricultural island?
Thank you for that. Yeah, I definitely tend to focus on the countryside because that's, where I like to spend my time. And they do have several urban centers that are pretty highly developed. I mean, you'll like I think I mentioned, you can find an internet cafe just about every corner, and most, they have like very nice hotels and things like that. But a lot of folks, I think it's, I have to check the numbers, but it's about 70% of the population are still rural farmers. So it's these I think, and don't quote me yet, but it's about 8 big cities, major cities with very high population densities. And then the rest is very, very spread out, very remote and rural.
All right, good question. Wayne, I see your hand is up and you're unmuted. Go ahead, Wayne.
What is the least popular lemur in Madagascar?
That is an interesting question. I'm going to jump back through my slides so I can show you the picture. And it's always very beauty is in the eye of the beholder, of course. I think they're all beautiful, but there is one lemur that is somewhat unpopular in Madagascar because they have a story about the animal that they're very superstitious and they think it's a bad luck animal. So let's see if I can show you this one. This is called the eye. And it's this lemur. Let's see if I don't get big. This lemur right here. Can you see my cursor circling it? It's kind of scary looking. If you look at him really quick, he's got this dark body, but with this crazy grizzly hair and freaky long fingers. And he's actually got teeth like a rodent. Very different from most primates. And so because it's nocturnal, it only goes out at night, so people don't usually see it. Because it's kind of freaky looking, there are a lot of stories and superstitions that if you see this animal, something bad might happen to you or your family. And the only way to prevent that bad luck from happening is to kill the animal. So if I had to say, that would be the people's least favorite. But that's not true of all Madagascar. And it's kind of a traditional story. A lot of people these days don't necessarily believe in it, but it's still out there.
All right. I personally think eyes are super cool. If you look them up on YouTube, they've got this big long finger they use to tap on the tree. and they're almost like a woodpecker. They're listening with that tap for a hollow spot to find a grub. So I think they're pretty darn cool. So if you look on, I think there's a really cool BBC clip where they got some great footage of it. So definitely check that out.
Yeah.
Cordelia and Huxley and Waterloo, let me turn your mic back on.
I was wondering, what is the biggest challenge with researching lemurs?
Great question. Thank you. And it really depends on the kind of research that people are doing. For me, what I was most interested in my research was to try to figure out how abundant or how rare species were in different kinds of habitats. So like where I worked in the rainforest, the park where I worked, there were about 13 species that were known to live there. But if you go out there on any one day, you're not going to see all 13. You might see one, you might see three. So actually it took me 3 years of hiking all over the rainforest every day, every night with a big team of Malagasy assistants that we literally 1,500 kilometers worth of hiking around the forest, searching for lemurs. And like I said, for some of the lemurs, like the I only saw it twice. So that was a very big challenge for me, is how rare the animals really are and how specific they are in the kinds of habitats they need. Like if I return to this picture with the bamboo lemur, they need bamboo, obviously. So this one over here, who's noshing on some bamboo in the picture, if there's a forest that doesn't really have any bamboo in it, they can't survive there. This one similarly is the rough lemur. They eat 90% ripe fruit. So if there's not enough fruit in the habitat, they can't live there. Other species are much more common. This one, like the avahi, they eat leaves of trees that are very common, and you can go out on any given night and you're probably going to see those mouse lemurs, but others are very, very rare. So that was very challenging for me. But then other people face challenges of, for example, you may hear in one of our Duke Lemur Center events, researchers who study aspects of their genetics or of the stomach bacteria, and they've got to chase these lemurs around and try to catch their poop, because inside the poop, there's a lot of data. But it can be challenging because, the lemurs are running through the forest, pooping, and now you got to try and chase them and find that poop in the forest. So you'll hear more about that soon, hopefully.
All right. Well, James, one more quick question before we wrap up from YouTube. COVID-19, as Madagascar, its island nature helps spare it from some of the impacts, or are they struggling right now?
That's very timely, and I appreciate getting that question, because we are really worried about our colleagues in Madagascar and around the world, obviously. So we've been really, really worried about COVID getting into a lot of these tropical, especially African countries, because we've seen how their healthcare infrastructure is not like what we have in the United States or in Canada especially. So it can be really devastating when there's a disease. In Madagascar in 2017, they had a plague outbreak. In 2019, they had a measles outbreak. So we were really, really scared that something bad would happen. But actually, I have to say that the president of Madagascar has done a really great job of, from the very beginning, preventing ships from coming in where they suspected people had come from places where they may be infected. They stopped flights from Italy and other countries very early on, and then they have started confinement very early. And actually right now they have 150 cases, plus or minus. Most of the people have either recovered or they're still in hospital, but I think there's still no deaths. So I have to really commend them. They've done a pretty great job, and it's really hard for them now because, you're talking about a lot of people who depend on just day-to-day income. Now they can't go out, they can't do their work. But they've really been largely compliant and patient and helping to keep this under control. So I really hope for the best for them, that they continue.
All right. Well, first of all, James, I'd like to give a huge shout out to YouTube. We had such a great group joining us live on YouTube today from all over the place. Thank you for your great questions and joining us today. If you do stick around on YouTube, we've got an event with the Toronto Zoo starting in a couple minutes. You can learn about some zoo crews, so some of the animals that live in packs or herds or schools. You can learn about some of those animals and see some of them at the zoo. Huge shout out to all the groups who are with us on camera today. Thank you to the students and the educators who came in with us and for your great questions. And James, thanks for kicking off a great starter event with the Duke Lemur Center. We're excited to have more events.
Great. Thank you for having me. Thank you all for your awesome questions and your interest and enthusiasm. And I look forward to more events in the future.
All right. Once again, thanks everyone for tuning in today. And we are going to sign off for now.
All right, so we are live, everyone. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants.